Eagles Entertainment.
The journey of the draft is driven by AAA. AAA Roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We've got a very interesting show this week, a little bit different than what you are mainly accustomed to on this channel, because myself, Chris McPherson, Ben Fennell, we're recording this all from three different locations, all of us recording this from our respective houses. But really, the point of this week's show, we're going to jump around the league. Now, all of these transactions, most of them are not official, right? Because all these players have to be able to pass physicals. They've got to be able to sign the dotted line, and most teams are not able to do that because their facilities are closed. And really quickly, for more on why, obviously, look, everyone knows why the facilities are closed. Everything that's going on around this country, around the world with COVID-19. Dave Spadaro actually this week on the Eagles Insider podcast covered that from an Eagles standpoint. So make sure you go check that out. He caught up with Don Smolinski and Howie Roseman, some players, some coaches, just going into the decision to close the facility and what that means for operations moving forward. So make sure you go check that out on the Eagles Insider podcast. But again, so all of these transactions that we're going to talk about this week, none of them are really official. So you got to kind of take them not with a grain of salt, but just know all of it not official at this point. But that being said, we're going to talk about them as if they're official, and really what if they do go through, what that would mean for the first round of the NFL draft. And I think that that's going to be the kind of the crux of this conversation, certainly in Draft Buzz. For Pick 6, Ben, C-Mac, and I are going to talk about basically some sleepers, the guys that are going to probably go on day 3 of the draft that have the most intrigue. We've got some questions from you as well in our draft mailbag, but let's get into it. Let's get right into the top here. It's time for Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, let's start this off with Draft Buzz, and we'll welcome in Chris McPherson, Ben Fennell. Guys, I can't see and touch you, but I can hear you. Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back on, Fran. It's certainly going to be a different dynamic. You know, it's one thing when you're doing it in a studio and you can see everyone's reactions. We have the chemistry going where we can jump in, jump out with these. So it's going to be a little different, but glad we're still able to do this. Still a lot of NFL news, obviously, with free agency kicking off and draft news to be talking about.
Feels a little bit like blind dating here. We're kind of like behind the curtain.
Yeah, except I already know what you guys are like, so that the mystery of the blind date is already gone.
Hey, we're catches, all right?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into some of these big free agent moves. We'll start with the Eagles, right? I mean, look, the Eagles early in the week re-signed defensive tackle Hassan Ridgeway, re-signed Nate Sudfeld as well. Then middle of the week, they agreed to terms with defensive tackle Javon Hargrave from the Pittsburgh Steelers. I talked about him over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast with Matt Williamson, a really fun discussion, but really excited about the addition of a Javon Hargrave. You've got Jalen Mills and Rodney McLeod returning to the fold as well. Any of these things impact 21st overall in your guys' minds?
I'll jump in to start here, Fran. I'm going to say no. I think everyone's going to look at defensive tackle and think that's off the board, but I still think that it's a best player available scenario. There are certainly other places that the Eagles are going to probably look to address, but I think they're going to go into it with the situation once all is said and done. We're still in the very beginning stages, quite honestly, of free agency, and I think it's going to be a situation where they're going to be able to line up and play on April 23rd. The date of the draft is not changing, so at that point in time, the roster will be what it is, but I think they'll be in a situation where they can go out and just say, we got to take the best player available. And you may say there's a lot of resources being invested in defensive tackle, but, it's a situation where you're going to be looking toward the future. Ridgeway is a 1-year deal. Malik Jackson is coming off an injury. So to me, it seems like that they wanted to make sure that defensive tackle was improved for 2020. It's something that they looked to do in 2019. And unfortunately, with Malik Jackson getting hurt in the season opener, that didn't quite work out as planned. So I think they want to make sure that spot is cemented going into this upcoming season.
Yeah, and I think free agency is all about trying to alleviate those needs on draft day and just make your board that much more flexible to see how things fall to you. And I love bolstering the trenches anytime you can. Hassan Ridgeway played some really good ball for us last year. I think that's a great depth piece, a great rotational piece that every team needs. You need a solid 6, 7, maybe even 8 defensive linemen to survive a season. And the way Malik Jackson, we really didn't get to unwrap that toy last year. Got injured in week 1, and he's a dominating player. He looked great in training camp, looked good in the preseason. We were really excited to see him next to Fletcher Cox. And Javon Hargrave's a young, exciting player. South Carolina State's really pumped out a lot of good players the last couple of years with Darius Leonard, Javon Hargrave. I think last year at the Combine, we do these prototypical XO tapes with Daniel Jeremiah, and Javon Hargrave was his pick for a prototype for a no shade, which I was a little surprised because he's a little bit undersized. But when I got into his tape, man, he was productive in nearly every instance and every aspect of playing in the trenches for the Pittsburgh Steelers, whether it's stopping the run, making plays out to the numbers, collapsing the pocket inside out. Really good, exciting young player with a lot of energy too. I think he's really going to kind of embrace playing next to other high energy guys like a Fletcher Cox and a Brandon Graham. Really excited to see how this defensive line really comes together.
Yeah, like I said, I talked about it pretty extensively over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. So you can go check that out wherever podcasts can be found. Let's look around the league a little bit, guys, because a ton of movement already this week. And I'll start with a division rival because I feel like at number 17, the Dallas Cowboys, it's going to be really, really interesting to see what they do come draft weekend. Because number one, this is a team that historically drafts for need. You know, this is a team that they'll go in and they'll say, look, we need to address position A, B, C, D, and E. We're going to walk out of this draft having addressed a lot of these spots. And, you know, you're talking about a club now that has lost Byron Jones at corner. We kind of anticipated that would happen. Byron Jones goes to Miami. They lose Malik Collins to the Las Vegas Raiders. They lose Jeff Heath. They re-sign Amari Cooper and they tag Dak Prescott. Any ideas in terms of how this could impact what they do at 17? Like, losing Jeff Heath, who has kind of always been, a guy that we would always say on the outside, oh, they're going to replace him at some point. Yet they never replace him. Do they go with Kavon Frazier? Do they go with any of these other young guys that they have in the building at strong safety? Or do we start really penciling in Xavier McKinney here? Or do they go off the board? Because I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't rule anything out, with that team. And from could they add a wide receiver? It looks like by re-signing Amari Cooper, that's off the table. But they did lose Randall Cobb, so could they add another receiver in this draft? I think that could be something interesting to kind of watch.
Well, before free agency, the interesting thing, in my opinion, sorry to cut you off there, C-Mac, is I think the Cowboys and the Eagles had a lot of similar needs. So sitting there at 17 and sitting there at 21 for the Eagles, I think there's a lot of kind of similar players that they were both in the market for, whether it's a corner, receiver help, the future of the safety position, bolstering the interior defensive line. So now after free agency, we're starting to kind of get through the smoke here and see what the real needs are after these signings. So the Cowboys, obviously locked up Amari Cooper, so maybe they're not so much in the market for that top flight receiver. And now they need that top flight corner to replace Byron Jones. So I think the needs really parallel each other with our division rival.
I'm also intrigued by the defensive line. They lost Robert Quinn, who signed.
No question. Yep.
So that's a position where, does an AJ Epinesa of Iowa come into conversation there? Maybe if they're scared off by how Taco Charlton didn't work out for them, they want to go kind of in the opposite direction, or if they want something that's, along the similar lines as Chason from LSU, maybe come into the mix there at 17 if they're looking to bolster the defensive line. But certainly the back end of the defense, it probably is another position. But, do you have a surprise? You mentioned losing Randall Cobb. If they're possibly looking for a slot, there's Justin Jefferson, someone who has not really been linked to the Cowboys to this point, but would be another big ticket weapon for Dak Prescott. So what's interesting about the Cowboys is there's not really been a surprise. I think everyone expected them to lose Byron Jones. The real question was going to be Amari Cooper. Would he stay? But now that he's in the fold, it's going to be intriguing to see what they do to either, provide Dak with more weapons and go in the draft route would be a cheaper option since you kind of already used up your resource in free agency, or do they try to solidify the defense more?
I love the thought process there, C-Mac. To me, the defensive line is a position that maybe we just don't talk enough about with them at 17th overall, because even with Malik Collins, I think the defensive tackle was a position where, if a Kinlaw were to fall to them, is that a spot where he could go? I absolutely look at defensive tackle and look at defensive end for them and say, yeah, this is definitely a position where they could address either of those spots. That's a really, really good point. And Kavon Chasen makes a lot of sense. In terms of you want a similar skill set to a Robert Quinn, I think he's got some similarities there. No, that's a really, really good point. So I would look at defensive line there. Another team that's picking, relatively just ahead of the Eagles at 16, right ahead of Dallas, is the Atlanta Falcons. And you're talking about roster turnover. The Atlanta Falcons, they released Desmond Trufant, veteran corner for them, who was their starting left corner for a long time. Devontae Freeman at running back. They lose Vic Beasley in free agency as well. So you're talking about a team that they're going to have some new faces there. This is another team that routinely drafts for need, very active in terms of moving up, moving down. We know that Thomas Dimitroff likes to do that. He mentioned here, I think right after the first day of free agency that, this is another year where we could potentially be on the move. So any thoughts on what Atlanta has done?
No, not particularly. Where did Devontae Freeman end up?
He hasn't anywhere yet, but since they released him, my guess is that he's not going to end up back there.
Man, there's a lot of big corners on the market that have a lot of experience, whether that's Desmond Trufant, who's really played well in that cover 3 scheme of Dan Quinn down there in Atlanta, or even a Xavier Rhodes. Big corners, played a lot of ball. There's a lot of interesting corners on the market. I know a couple have already gone off the board with Byron Jones and James Bradbury, but there's still a lot of intriguing players still out there. It's kind of interesting to see them get rid of a player like Desmond Trufant, who are tough to find corners of that size, speed, experience. But I guess the price tag was a little bit too much for him.
And I think injuries as well have certainly played a factor. Xavier Rhodes, to be honest, would make a little bit of sense there in Atlanta in that scheme. But no, I think when you look at Atlanta, corner certainly as a position, they would make a lot of sense for them. I don't think we're looking at running back that early, but pass rush is consistently, Kavon Chasen is a name that has been consistently connected to them. I'm going to be very interested to see which direction that they go, but still some time here in free agency to kind of change that. Another team that they have 2 picks now in the first round. You mentioned Xavier Rhodes, the Minnesota Vikings. They cut Xavier Rhodes. They cut Linval Joseph in the middle of that defense. I don't know if Jaleel Johnson, they expect to kind of step in and be that guy, or if they want to address that elsewhere. But they trade Stephon Diggs to the Buffalo Bills. And this was another team that was interested in a receiver. You remove them from the board, but now the Minnesota Vikings now have 2 picks. They've got the 22nd pick and the 25th pick, both behind the Eagles. But if they were to target a Jerry Jeudy or a Henry Ruggs and they decided to move up, they certainly have the ammunition to do so while still keeping an extra first-round pick. So Minnesota Vikings, certainly an interesting team here in the early starts of free agency in terms of how they could shape round 1 of the draft.
Well, I feel like they want to build around those young players in the front 7 on defense. Obviously, Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, Danielle Hunter are the cream of the crop. Seems like they're in a bit of an identity crisis in the secondary there. Obviously, the kind of comings and goings of Andrew Sendejo, and then releasing both corners, or pretty much hitting reset on both corners, is a big deal. I'm not sure if they feel the kid from UCF that they drafted early 2 years ago, Mike Hughes, is ready to be an outside corner for him. But that's kind of a uncharted territory to pretty much say we're going to go with 2 completely new starting corners on the outside and get rid of a lot of big players for that team. Linval Joseph, Stephon Diggs, a bit of an identity crisis. And I'd like to see them continuing to bolster the trenches, take pressure off of Kirk Cousins, and feed Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook can be a star in this league if you feature him. So I think they need to build around the right young players there, and let's see who they get on the outside. It's kind of a changing of the times there for Mike Zimmer.
They got so much value for Stephon Diggs. It's incredible. But certainly with the 2 first-round picks, again, both coming after the Eagles selection at 21, they can move up and target someone if they want to get another receiver to replace Diggs, or like you said, Ben, just to bolster the defense and continue the strengths there. But they've reinvested in Kirk Cousins. They gave him a 2-year extension. So certainly it would not be a surprise to try and figure, that he's going to be your quarterback for the next couple of years. Okay, you've seen him in that offense for a little bit now. You've seen how he flourishes. What can they do to take some of the pressure off of him?
Man, Fran, I'm excited for Buffalo with Josh Allen, all these weapons. You have a speedy John Brown, Cole Beasley, Stephon Diggs. I think Dawson Knox is going to be a star at tight end in this league. Devin Singletary, they had no problem saying goodbye to LaShawn McCoy because Devin Singletary's presence there in training camp. A lot of exciting weapons out there in Buffalo around Josh Allen.
Yeah, no question. And, they've had a couple of changes there on the defensive front. Some guys moving in, some guys stepping out. They signed AJ Klein. They lose Shaq Lawson, but they bring in Mario Addison, who that staff is familiar with. So they've had some changes. They brought in.
I think they brought in Josh Norman too.
No question. Yep, exactly. So they'll continue to add through the draft as well. They've got a few picks here in April, but that certainly is an interesting team. Look, with the changes in New England, which we haven't touched on yet, but we will. That AFC East is looking a little bit brighter for an upstart team like the Buffalo Bills. Real quickly, guys, before we get into New England and everything that's happened there, another big one was San Francisco trading DeForest Buckner straight up for the 13th overall selection for the Indianapolis Colts. Look, the Colts were a team that could use some help on the defensive front. They've been looking for more stars there on that side of the ball. DeForest Buckner, to me, is one of the best defensive linemen in football. So they get him for the 13th overall pick. What I will say now, though, is that puts the San Francisco 49ers in a spot where, yeah, look, if a Derek Brown or a Kinlaw or someone like that fell to them at 13, sure, they could address that. But I also think that this is a team that, you lose Emmanuel Sanders in free agency potentially because he's still on the open market as we record this. Could they be looking at wide receiver? That adds a team there in the mix ahead of the Eagles that could be looking to address the wide receiver position.
When I look at the Colts here, and I love these kind of situations where it's a DeForest Buckner. Who is DeForest Buckner in the 2020 draft? Is there a DeForest Buckner? Will we be able to get him? And if the Indianapolis Colts said, you know what, we have a pretty good roster. We need an interior defensive tackle. We love Kinlaw, but we're not so sure Kinlaw is going to be there at 13. It's Kinlaw versus DeForest Buckner. And it's a really interesting conversation when you start to weigh the board and the prospects versus free agents and even guys that aren't free agents and potential trade partners. And I think that's what this whole time period is about in the NFL. And how do you improve your roster at any means necessary? And a lot of times you have to compare guys with 2, 3, 4 years experience with the current draft board. And it's not the deepest interior defensive line class. So if they maybe thought, hey, Kinlaw's not going to be there for us at 13, we got to look elsewhere. And they got creative. They got aggressive. San Francisco obviously has a pretty deep defensive line, and they were willing to part ways. So I think that's just an interesting conversation to weigh. A lot of times we get a little bit too vacuumed into the prospects and figuring out who on the defensive line board do we like. You really have to weigh the entire market in the NFL when addressing these needs.
Yeah, looking from the Colts perspective, they probably figured Kinlaw was not going to be there at 13. So that's going to be interesting now in looking at these top 12 teams. Where is he going to end up? So that's an interesting discussion in and of itself. So the Colts, solidifying the trenches there because they probably were a team that we also figured could be in the quarterback market. Well, they obviously getting Phillip Rivers on a 1-year deal, so they're probably not going to address quarterback obviously very early. So they wanted to make sure that the trenches, as they built one of the best offensive lines in the league, now they help solidify the defense. From the Niners standpoint, I mean, that pass rush was what made that team go. It's what got the team to the Super Bowl. So that trickle-down effect of not having DeForest Buckner in there is going to be very, very intriguing to see if they can still rush the passer at an elite level like they did in 2020.
Yeah, and Fran, really quick, as much as these free agents kind of clear the board early in the draft, every now and then there's players that still kind of make it murky. And like I see a Teddy Bridgewater with Carolina or a Jack Conklin with the Cleveland Browns. I'm not willing to say the Panthers won't take a quarterback of the future or the Browns won't take another tackle there at the 10th spot. So as much as it kind of, alleviates some needs and addresses what these teams need, I think there's still going to be some intriguing talent at the same position that you have to look to the future and you have to look to best available. So while some teams are a little bit clearer, I still think it's kind of murky with some others.
Yeah, I that's a great point because I think that you look at a Brian Bulaga, going to the LA Chargers. You look at a Jack Conklin going to Cleveland. You look at Cam Newton or Teddy Bridgewater going to Carolina, potentially replacing Cam Newton. Are those guys the catch-all, the solve-all problems for that team at those positions? Is Cleveland, are they out of the tackle business? They out of the tackle market in the top 10 just because they added Jack Conklin on a 3-year deal? My guess would be no. And you know what else too, Ben? And we'll talk about this because this was the first big mega deal, I guess, the mega trade early this week was DeAndre Hopkins getting traded from the Houston Texans to the Arizona Cardinals. Now, a lot of people would say, oh, that removes Arizona from the wide receiver market. And maybe it does, and it might. But also, keep in mind, their top 3 receivers this year were Larry Fitzgerald, who's he's going into his final year of his contract, which has been the case for the last few years, and he's getting up there. You don't know how much longer Larry Fitzgerald's going to go. You've got Christian Kirk, a good young receiver. And then after that, you had some young guys that you weren't quite sure, like Demir Bird. You had Keyshawn Johnson. You had the kid from Iowa State, Hakeem Butler, last year. Like, you're trying to bring those guys along, but maybe they do decide to still go round 1 wide receiver. I think that's not necessarily completely off the board. Yeah, is it more likely that they address tackle or another pass rusher or something like that? Sure, but I still think I don't know if I'd completely erase wide receiver from the Arizona Cardinals at 8th overall.
Especially in an air raid offense where you're playing a lot of 4, even 5 receiver sets. Listen, the tight end position isn't featured. They don't throw to the running back a whole lot. You need a good stable of receivers. And I know when you have a Kyler Murray, a Cliff Kingsbury, being 5, 6 receivers deep isn't a eye-popping, depth to have. So we'll see the development of guys like Andy Isabella and Hakeem Butler and Keyshawn Johnson. But adding to it, in this legendary draft class, if a CeeDee Lamb falls to him there, I think they take that player all day long, and you just try to outscore teams in this league. And we've seen teams win games by running up the score on them. And I think Cliff Kingsbury is going to lean a little bit towards a video game style offense.
Does Darqueze Dennard remove the Jacksonville Jaguars from addressing corner at 9 overall?
That's another one there that I think if Jeffrey Okudah maybe falls to him, a couple teams try to leapfrog and get quarterbacks, or maybe a CJ Henderson is sitting there. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars all day long are in the market for corner, and how far they've come since the days of having, Aaron Colvin and Jalen Ramsey, and the other kid is blanking right now that just left. AJ Boye, they were really deep in the secondary just a couple years ago, and now they seem so depleted. So if you don't have corners in the NFL, you better go get one. So there's still a couple days in free agency to see if they alleviate those needs. I expect the Jaguars and the Cowboys both to pick up a free agent corner in the next 48 hours.
Here's something that I find interesting. This is going to be more philosophical in light of what's going on with the NFL and society because of the coronavirus. Is, are teams going to look at the rookie class and wonder if their development will be delayed at all because we don't know at this point when we're going to be able to get the players in the building? If OTAs and rookie camps are getting pushed back, and maybe they won't, and maybe we'll have a normal-ish off season in about a month or so. But if rookie camps and other off season activities get delayed, are rookies going to be able to get up to speed? Is that I just wonder if that's something. And this is pie in the sky.
That's a really interesting point, C-Mac, because like if you're in the 7th round and you're deciding between maybe that 5th year senior that's 24 years old versus that redshirt junior that, is only 21 years old, and you need somebody ready to play this year on a contending roster, maybe that is a thought from some guys in a developmental sense to say, you know what, we may not be able to push this guy along as well as the other guy who's more ready to play right now. So those are some really deep conversations that the average fan and the media really aren't talking about, but it's a real situation and probably a conversation going on behind the scenes.
Well, you go back to 10 years ago, the lockout year in 2011. I got to imagine that the conversation is going to be very similar, right? I mean, you didn't know when NFL was coming back. You didn't know if training camp, when the mini camps were coming. You didn't know. So I would imagine that it affected teams' draft strategies that year. We'll see if this impacts people's strategies this year. I think that's a really good point. Something we'll certainly be touching on in the next few weeks. Guys, let me ask you this question. New England, right? You see Tom Brady leave. Obviously, relatively big news. Do you see that as good for the Eagles, bad for the Eagles, not really impacting the Eagles at all when it comes to the draft? Because me personally, I look at that and say, New England's trading up for a quarterback. They apparently there was reported interest in Bridgewater, but then there were reports that they weren't interested in Bridgewater. There are some other names being thrown out there that, maybe they'll go for this guy in free agency, or, they'll try and trade for this player. To me, I wonder, all right, well, do they set their eyes on one of these young quarterbacks and try and make a move up the board to try and go get them?
It's tough
I
to
can
say
say with great
because
confidence. I can say with great confidence, I have no idea what the New England Patriots are doing this offseason and moving forward. Not saying like, what are they doing? I don't believe it. Just it's a very unprecedented and kind of unpredictable time with them. I'm not really sure where they are, for lack of better words, mentally with their roster and the future of the franchise.
I just think back to recent quarterback situations, and this is very rare. So I look back to a couple years ago with the Colts and Peyton Manning. Well, you had Andrew Luck waiting in the wings. You can go back to the Niners in Montana. They had Steve Young waiting in the wings. I don't think at this point you can put Jarrett Stidham on that pedestal as much as they may say in public that they like him. It's unknown. So could they still, we're early in free agency, could they still acquire an Andy Dalton, a veteran, to be your stopgap and still develop Stidham? Could be, possibly. But you have to think that they've been preparing for this moment. They've been readying themselves for this moment. Just the way it seems like, at least from what we've seen in the media, how these negotiations have played out, that the Patriots were ready for Tom Brady or preparing for Tom Brady to move on. So certainly they've had to have had a plan in place for some time now. It's just going to be intriguing to see what that actually is.
I can see them going and getting like a Jacoby Brissett again and bringing him back home, surviving the year, clunk your way to a 2-14 season, and then go get Trevor Lawrence for the next 20 years.
Yeah, I don't think Bill Belichick's in the business of going 2-14. Me personally, I feel
it hasn't been known to happen.
Yeah, my guess is that they'll try and either be aggressive and try and make a move up for one of the big guys in this draft, or they'll try and get somebody. Maybe that's not like true stopgap, 1 year stopgap, but someone that they feel that they can win now with. Maybe they go and try and make a deal for a Nick Foles in Jacksonville. Maybe they go and try and make a deal for an Andy Dalton in Cincinnati. That would be something I think would be interesting to watch. But I don't think that they'll go into the mode of, all right, let's wait for Trevor Lawrence and we'll do it that way. My guess is they're going to continue to try and win now, because the last thing Bill Belichick wants, we said, like, ego comes into play here with everybody around the NFL. Bill Belichick is not going to go 2-14 while Tom Brady wins the NFC South with the Tampa Bay Bucks. He's going to try and win and show that this is still my team. So my guess, Bill Belichick's going to go into this saying, all right, who can we get to run the ship now and help us win the East again?
And I guess we need to start saying 2-15, right?
Well, yeah, that's
another year. Another year. But
I could see the Patriots maybe going to get like Cam Newton and go rally these guys with chips on their shoulder. And
one other thing I just want to add here, Cam Newton would be certainly fascinating to be in the Patriots scheme in that environment. But this goes back to the uncertainty of moving forward, because pro days have been canceled. On-site visits, the top 30 visits have been canceled. This is where the teams with the best scouting departments are going to flourish, because did you get enough of your homework done at the Senior Bowl, at the Shrine Bowl, at the Combine, to feel good about where you are from an evaluation standpoint, not just the film, but the mental side, okay, and the personality side and the character side, because that's really what this month is typically geared towards, trying to find out those little extra things to kind of break the ties that you might have on your draft board. So without this part of the process, it's going to be incumbent upon teams to have already done the homework, to already done the work behind the scenes with your scouting visits and such, to try to project as best as you can. And at certain positions, like quarterback, it's so much more important than others, because there's so much more of the leadership and the intangibles that comes into play. It just makes you feel good that you have, if you're the Eagles, you have a Carson Wentz, and that you're good at that position, that you have your franchise quarterback. So obviously the character is going to be important no matter who you bring into the building, because it's going to impact the culture. But at these key positions like quarterback, there's going to be so much more in common. And, usually these are those stories you hear about the dinners at North Dakota, and you're able to see how he interacts in public, and you get those private workouts and things of that nature. It's going to be so different not having that, unless they find a way to do that. I don't know if that's going to happen, especially with the fact that they're not going to move the draft and they're keeping it the April 23rd to 25th date range.
Well, C-Mac, I think to your point, I mean, it goes back to a conversation we had with Jim Nagy out in Indianapolis at the Combine just a couple weeks ago where, not only does it go to your scouts, because, your scouts are doing the dirty work on the road all through the fall and through the summer, but, the decision makers as well. And remember what he said, the Eagles with Howie Roseman, they've always had a good reputation of, Howie and everybody that's in that leadership role, Andy Weidel in this year's case, trusting those scouts because the scouts can go do the work, but if a GM or a decision maker goes rogue and says, "Oh, well, I don't care what the scout says. Like the owner wants this quarterback, or the GM wants this pass rusher. Like you're going to be relying on having a scouting staff, a personnel staff that is all on the same page. And I think that's one of the good things about the situation that is going on here in Philadelphia right now is that everybody is in lockstep. This is a group that's been together for a long time. And so there is a lot of trust there. I think that is one of the big takeaways as well, to your earlier point about teams are going to have to trust their scouts to be able to get the work done behind the scenes. Some of these meetings I'm sure are going to happen, kind of how we're doing this podcast over FaceTime and, and Skype and things like that. But look, it's going to be very, very interesting. And I'm sure there will be lots of stories, really interesting and different stories that are going to be told after this draft as to how teams and prospects and agents had to navigate the circumstances of where we're at right now.
Yeah, and Fran, really quick, like this is also a unique time in scouting departments because it's the premier time to merge your pro personnel scouting and your college scouting. And a lot of those times during the season, those guys aren't interacting a whole lot. Your college guys are on the road. Your pro guys are digging through waiver wires, practice squads, things like that. They're immediately going into free agents. The college guys are on the road doing pro days, combine. But right now is when you have to merge that all together. And your board is not just the college players. It's the free agents. It's the trade partners. It's your own roster. And I think there's a lot of work that goes into scouting departments that isn't just college scouting. I think we're kind of used to thinking scouts on the road, sideline of college games. But there's a lot of pro work too. And this is the time of year where that all has to kind of come together and jive into one board. And it can be messy at times, but teams that have a good system and a good cohesion, like the Philadelphia Eagles, you really start to see it all, put together.
Yeah, I think it's going to be certainly one of the big topics that we'll all be following here over the next few weeks. Well, guys, great discussion there. Let's get into now the next part of our segment here, or the next segment here in the show, and that's Pick Six. We're talking about some guys that have the most intrigue on day 3 of the NFL draft.
Now it's time for Pick Six.
All right, guys. Well, you know the homework. Pick Six. We're going to pick some guys that were, for all intents and purposes, these are sleepers. Guys that we're all excited about that are potentially going to go day 3 of the draft. I'll kick us off this week. I'm going to go with Clemson safety Kavon Wallace. Ben, you and I have been talking about this guy going back into the fall. I've been a big fan of his game, a little bit on the undersized side of the spectrum for a safety, but this is a 4-year starter for a great defense in Clemson and wore a lot of hats. You talk about the versatility of an Isaiah Simmons and what he was asked to do for Brent Venables in that defensive scheme. Well, you can't just have one versatile safety. I've said this on the podcast before. You can't just have one versatile guy because you can't have one guy that's lining up all over the place. You have to have lots of guys that can do that. And he's Kavon Wallace is a guy that can do just that. Can play deep on the back end, but really brings a lot of value in my mind. Down in the slot, close to the line of scrimmage, has a really good feel for navigating through traffic, playing close to the line. He's a good run defender, despite the fact he's a little bit undersized. Consistently productive as a tackler. He's a really good tackler. This is a guy to me that's built to play in today's NFL. And whether he's going to be a big nickel player, whether he's going to be a starting strong safety, I feel that he's got the ability to be a impact player on a sub-package unit. Kavon Wallace, to me, is a guy that fits really well in today's game.
I don't know, Fran. I got to challenge you on that one there because I don't think Kavon Wallace is a day 3 player. I think he's a day 2 player all day long. He's a really good player. I'd be surprised if he fell to day 3, but I'll go with 2 other guys in a similar department here. And rarely ever do we see kind of sleepers in the SEC, but it's kind of true. And this guy didn't get a combine invite, but Nigel Warrior at the University of Tennessee has played a lot of ball. He was a 5-star top recruit. He's got coverage skills. He's got range. He's pretty physical down in the box and protecting the alley. Intercepted Tua Tagovailoa in the red zone this past year. He was obviously on a pretty dysfunctional team in the University of Tennessee. But this guy has a lot of talent, a lot of upside. And I think when you get good players on bad teams, it's really tough to scout them, and you really have to look at him in a vacuum. Another guy, Shaheem Carter at University of Alabama, a guy that's played a lot of ball in a variety of positions on the back end there. So 2 SEC players with a lot of experience that can cover and support the run.
Well,
Kind
the
of
only reason
can you be a sleeper in the SEC? I'm going back to your tweet a couple maybe a week or two ago, Ben, and you were looking for
I'm
draft
adamant
sleepers.
that there's no such thing as a Power 5 sleeper, because when you have to weigh the entire landscape of prospects, so that's D1, D2, D3, FCS, NAIA, there's no such thing as a Power 5 sleeper. That means that player's been up through recruiting, probably had to work his way through the depth chart. He's on TV on Saturdays. Those guys are known in the NFL. They're known by the pretty hardcore fans and people following college football. So I wanted to try to give some love to those guys that maybe aren't on those powerhouse programs.
What about Brian Harrion? He was a running back from Georgia that was the back, and he goes to the combine. He was the backup to
there
to
are rare situations. Usually it's an FCS grad transfer that gets hurt or doesn't win their spot, and then they go off the grid, or like a Matt Castle that, obviously is a backup through their whole career. So it can happen, but you have to use those situations wisely.
The only reason I said that Kavon Wallace, I think, could be day 3 is because I would say I'd be good with him on day 2, but you look at the safety group. I mean, Grant Delpit, Xavier McKinney, Antoine Winfield, you go to Ashton Davis, Kyle Duggar, Jeremy Chin, Terrell Burgess. All these guys are being talked about day 2. Brian Cole potentially sneaking into the 3rd round. Julian Blackman from Utah potentially sneaking into the 3rd round. I wouldn't rule it out that Kavon
with
Wallace
all those receivers and running backs as well that we expect to go on day 2. There's a really good chance. There's going to be some really good players on day 3. I think that's the fun part of the draft there.
All right, who you got for us?
My offensive player, and I'm surprised that he'll last to day 3, but there's so much depth at wide receiver, at the offensive line. We're not talking a lot about the tight ends, and I think Harrison Bryant from Florida Atlantic, I think, is someone who could be a hot commodity. Performed well at the Senior Bowl, was one of my practice standouts down there. Stellar positional workout at the Combine. All-American as a senior, won the John Mackey Award, over 1,000-yard receiving, 7 touchdowns. And he's drawn comparisons by our good friend Lance Zierlein to George Kittle. Again, but guys like Cole Kmet, there's Bryson Hopkins, Albert Okubuenum, who had the phenomenal 40 time at the Combine. These guys are being talked about being selected ahead of Bryant, which could make it that he lasts until day 3. So someone with a pass catching prowess, to me, I think will be a very, very good find there in day 3 if he happens to last that long.
Yeah, my second guy is going to be a Power 5 sleeper. Yeah, that's Marcus Bailey.
I got one more for you too. I got one more Power 5 sleeper. I got you after.
All right. So I'm going to go Marcus Bailey, the linebacker from Purdue. Ben, you and I talked about him back in like the summer, early fall. I loved Marcus Bailey on film. This is a guy that to me is really, really instinctive. He's not an A+ athlete, but to me, he's more than athletic enough to be a 3-down defender. We're not going to see him work out due to injury. But I think when you look at Marcus Bailey, this guy's been consistently productive. I like his instincts. I like his toughness. He's got a good feel for playing in the box, but then also being able to make plays outside the numbers. I look at Marcus Bailey as a guy that could be a 3-down player in the NFL who could be had as early, as late as the early parts of day 3. If he were perfectly healthy, to me, I think you're talking about Marcus Bailey as a top 50, top 60, potentially a top 75 pick. But I would not stick my nose up to Marcus Bailey. This is a guy that I think has 3-down ability in the NFL.
You literally took the words right out of my mouth. I was about to say, when he's on the field and healthy, he's a top 50 player all day long. There's a couple other players in the draft like that. Terrell Lewis, Natan Muti, the guys that are dealt with some injury plague, but when they're on the field and healthy, man, they are good players. So obviously you have to do the medical checks and things like that. But I'm going to go with an SEC sleeper again at running back. You got any guesses here, Fran?
An SEC sleeper at running back. All right, so it's not give me 1 second here. I'm just kind of rolling through the Rolodex.
Yeah, go through the mental Rolodex here. Yep.
All right, so you're not going to say Florida. You're not going to say Georgia because I already gave you Brian Harrion, so I gave you that layup. No one LSU, no one Alabama. Who you got for us?
I am going Florida, and I don't think this guy's gotten a lot of love lately. Michael Pirine is a really good player for Florida. He's never really been the feature back there. He's always kind of been in a committee, whether it's Jordan Scarlett with him there, and they have all those gadget players like Kadarius Toney, but they'll line him up outside the numbers. They'll throw him back shoulder fades. He's a good screen running back. I thought he looked pretty good at the Senior Bowl. He's a really good story as well. I think he drove himself to Florida for his recruiting visit or something like that. He's cousins of Samaje Perine. He's just a guy that I don't think his name is kind of out there in the midst of, the J.K. Dobbins and Jonathan Taylors and the sexy headliner names, but he's a good football player that was productive in the SEC, that catches the ball really well. I think everybody's looking for somebody to contribute on third down. I think he can really turn into a James White style of player for the New England Patriots. And the way this guy catches the ball lined up outside the numbers, it really kind of opens your eye. And I think he can really be a good value for somebody on day 3. Special teams, can run the ball, can catch the ball, and just a guy I just don't think's talked about. And an SEC running back not talked about doesn't happen too often.
C-Mac, who's your last guy?
So it's not going to be Derek Tuska, North Dakota State. I sort of could have banged a drum for here, pounded the table for him here. I'm going to go to defense. I'm going to go to cornerback. How about Harrison Hand out of Temple? And the reason I selected him, local kid. Okay, obviously he finished his college career at Temple, but from Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Started out at Baylor, transferred to be closer to home.
He did the backwards Matt rule.
Exactly. Got away from that rule, but good size, just shy of 6 feet, 197 pounds. He made Bruce Feldman's freak list in 2018, and you saw that at the combine as he had a 41-inch vert, tied with Jeff Okudah for tops, and then an 11-1 in the broad, which was tied for second. Very intriguing that he had 8 pass breakups as a freshman, has not quite been able to replicate that production. So if you can combine the athletic ability with the production he showed early on in his college career, could be a nice day 3 find for a team.
Hey, C-Mac, I love that freak list because you watch that or you read it in the summer. None of those guys are surprises at the combine because we're already expecting it. We see the kind of eye-popping numbers, the times, the jumps, the workouts. And those guys I know are highlighted on our sheets at the combine, and we're ready for them to jump big or run fast. And a lot of times they live up to it. So it's always fun to read those in the summer and then kind of cross-check it in February when the real workout's in front of your face.
No, that's a really good point. And, Bruce Feldman does a great job of doing that every single year. He's been doing it for the Athletic for the last couple. But, guys, good stuff there with some sleepers there on day 3. Let's wrap this show up. We've got a few questions here for Draft Mailbag.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, so first off, before we get started, the best way to support the show, we've had a really good, steady stream of reviews with questions and mock drafts, things to comment. So keep that going. And as you guys keep putting more onto that page, we'll answer more each week on the podcast. So I threw a couple extra here for this week's segment. We're going to start with CMart923, left a 5-star review on our Apple Podcast page. Again, that's the best way to throw us your support. It says, enjoy listening to the show. I did a 7-round mock controlling the Eagles using the Draft Network's mock draft machine, which did not include comp picks at the time. Here's the mock draft. Number 21 overall, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver, LSU. We haven't talked too much about Jefferson today. I think all of us are in agreement. Justin Jefferson, a really, really good player. A guy to me checks a lot of boxes. Has certainly helped himself at the combine with how he tested. But I think overall, when you look at him as a football player, checks a lot of boxes, guys.
Yeah, Justin Jefferson, I think we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago that I think his presence in the Eagles offense would be a lot like our expectations for Nelson Aguilar when he was drafted out of USC. But I think he's just a little bit more of a developed and ready prospect. I think the way his offense was designed at LSU makes him a little bit more NFL ready than the way Nelson was used at USC. But a really intriguing option, a guy that gets himself open. And like we've said before, a receiver that wins at every level of the defense, whether it's quick game, intermediate, down the field, speed threat, yak threat. I think he's everything you want in kind of a complete receiver.
Has the inside-outside versatility. Ben, you've raved about his route running in the past. Past the speed threshold at the combine was the big question for him. Extremely productive and one of the best college offenses of all time. So certainly checks a ton of boxes there. Would make a ton of sense for the Eagles at 21.
And then you go to number 53 overall, guys. And A.J. Tyrell, the cornerback from Clemson, is a really intriguing player. To me, I think another player that checks a lot of boxes. He had a really rough outing against LSU in that national title game. C-Mac, you talked about the production that team had. That Clemson game in the national title game was one of those games. And A.J. Tyrell had a rough outing. But overall, I think this is a really talented player. He can play the ball in the air. He's got all the athletic traits. He's got long speed. He's got short area quickness. I like his ability to hit pocket receivers. He's a great blitzer. He's a good tackler in the flat one-on-one. So A.J. Tyrell is a player to me that has a lot of intrigue for me, especially in day 2 of the draft. And then Jordan Elliott at number 85 in the 3rd round. I love that selection as well. This is a guy that can win in a lot of different ways. Out of Missouri, I compared him to Akeem Hicks last week because of his ability to win with power and quickness and technique. He can make plays outside the numbers. So what are your guys' thoughts here on day 2? A.J. Tyrell and Jordan Elliott. So to me, that's a really good twosome right there.
Yeah, I would love to add Jordan Elliott to this defensive line group. When he gets into his track stance and shoots across the line and shoots into backfield, man, he's a lot of fun to watch, makes a lot of plays out to the numbers, just like Fletcher Cox. A.J. Tyrell was a 5-star corner coming out of high school that everybody in the country wanted, was on the field immediately for Clemson. While he had a rough outing against LSU, I'm pretty sure he had the pick 6 against Tua the year before.
He did, yep.
So a guy that's played in a lot of big games for Clemson, has been experienced. And he's only a junior, which is pretty rare for these Clemson guys. Dabo really does a good job in getting them to stay for their senior campaigns there. But Jordan Elliott's a guy that I think would fit in perfectly with this defensive line group. But at 85, I could see somebody wanting to snag him kind of in the 2nd round.
All right, so I'll quickly just kind of breeze through these guys on day 3. Brandon Jones, the free safety from Texas, at 117 in the 4th round. Jones is a really intriguing player to me. Wore a lot of hats for that Texas defense. We're not really talking about Brandon Jones all that much, but really intriguing player. Wide receiver Michael Pittman at 148. Really, really productive this year for USC. Can go up and get it. Showed big play potential this past year. Was really the only receiver all year that really abused that Utah secondary. So Michael Pittman, really intriguing talent. Anthony Jennings off the edge at 150, the pass rusher from Alabama, kind of a do-everything guy, was more of a strong side linebacker. I think that's probably more of his role moving forward. Really interesting player. And then Davion Taylor, really athletic track athlete at the linebacker position from Colorado. We got to see him up close down at the Senior Bowl. So what are your guys' thoughts on those 4? Ben, we'll start with you.
Brandon Jones, I think, is really interesting. He doesn't have that kind of eye-popping upside like Gary Johnson did the year before, running a 4.3, but a speedy safety with coverage skills. Watch that week 2 game against LSU. Yep. He ran vertically with Justin Jefferson twice on slot fades. I did one of his games against Kansas State. I can't remember if he ran it back or not, but had a couple really impressive punt returns. So the guy that's going to contribute on special teams, a safety that can cover for you with speed. Michael Pittman, he reminds me a lot of Mac Hollins, and I'm not really sure the way Eagles fans feel about that, but the way Mac Hollins came out of North Carolina was really good attacking the ball, can beat press coverage. Special teams upside is how he's going to make his roster spot. And I see a similar type of player with Michael Pittman, a guy that can beat press coverage, really good and exciting and energetic special teams player that I think adding that extra value, especially for a 6'3", 220-pound receiver that you don't see a lot of those guys playing special teams, I think just adds another thing he can do for your team. And like you were saying, Davion Taylor, track star linebacker, you don't hear that too often. Another exciting player.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Michael Pittman. You talked about what the comparison to Mac Hollins. Now, if you get 2017 rookie year Mac Hollins, okay, very exciting. Okay, the injury stripped away a key element of his game there. Was also very in awe of his route running ability, his body control, the way he was able to win the one-on-ones there at the Senior Bowl. So certainly because it's such a deep group, he's not going to go into those middle rounds, but I think it'll be a good find for a team.
Yeah, I think I like the Michael Pittman and Mac Hollins discussion. I mean, Mac, look, the production wasn't always there in college at North Carolina because of some injuries that he had. But Michael Pittman has been consistently productive. Obviously, this year was the most productive season for him in that new offense. But really good mock draft there from CMart923. Thanks for the rating in the comment. Let's go through a couple of other ones here. Lewis Kyle left a 5-star review saying, "Hey guys, love the podcast. Sometimes, Fran, I think you could win a record for the most words said in a minute. You talk fast." I will say I am very cognizant of this, and I'm trying to get better. So thank you very much. Actually, all the people that left reviews that filled out the survey for the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, there were a couple of people who said that there, and that's when that first popped on my radar. So I am going to try and be a little bit slower, a little bit more deliberate with how I deliver a point. But So yeah, which is also brings me to a reminder. Our survey is still open for the Journey to the Draft podcast. You can go to PhiladelphiaEagles.com/journey survey and just kind of help us out. I didn't mention that at the top of this show, but Lewis, thanks for that little comment. But I also said, do you think Denzel Mims could be a number one wide receiver? Also, do you think trading down is a possibility for the Eagles? Thanks, guys. So number one, trading up, trading down, you never rule out anything with the Eagles. Obviously, Howie Roseman very active in terms of moving around the draft, so I wouldn't rule anything out there. What are you guys' thoughts on Denzel Mims? So I think we talked about him a little bit last week. I think he was my film room recap, and I was a little bit, I was impressed watching all of his targets this past year. It took me some time to come around on Denzel Mims, watching him in bits and pieces over the last couple of years. But I want to ask you first on Denzel Mims. And I want to get your guys' thoughts. What is a number one receiver in today's NFL? Like, I just don't know if that term exists anymore. But what are your thoughts overall, guys? C-Mac, I'll start with you for this one.
I would say the big playability is certainly enticing with Denzel Mims, and there's no one who I think has accelerated his draft stock more, I would say. I think that's a pretty fair statement to say throughout this draft process, the way he won at the Senior Bowl. All right, turn heads there, winning the one-on-one drills. I remember Troy Pride, who had a great week down there, was even he was beat by Mims and was just like, he's the one guy who just was not able to get to. Then at the Combine, Mims turned in a terrific positional workout, was explosive in the timing and testing drills. So from start to finish, Denzel Mims has certainly helped his cause, as much as just about anyone in this draft class to date. Very interesting discussion about the number one receiver. I think the biggest thing is, can they do it all in an offense? And teams are going to ask different things of what they want a receiver to do. But I think the main thing is, can they play all three positions is certainly something you want to look at. Is it someone who can win in the short game? Can they win off press coverage? Can they win in the slant? But can they also be reliable as an intermediate and deep threat as well? So that, to me, is what you want to see in a number one receiver. I think Denzel Mims certainly is someone who can win on the outside in the NFL. So very, very intriguing discussion in terms of who is a number one receiver. But I feel like it's really, in most people's minds, is he the go-to guy in your offense? And that's not necessarily the big play explosive guy, but I think it's someone who can do all of those things for you in an offense.
Yeah, my comp for Denzel Mims has always been AJ Green, and he tested a lot like him. He looks like him. He plays like him. Really good above the rim and body control, working the sidelines. He's made a lot of tough catches on third down out there in Baylor. We knew that he had the track speed, so running 4.38 was not a surprise to anybody with his sprinting champion background out there in Texas. But my one issue with Denzel Mims is he had a couple concentration drops. And just like Tyler Johnson, these high volume receivers are going to have a couple boneheaded drops. But Denzel Mims has some really impressive catches for every one of those drops, whether it's high pointing, acrobatic stuff on the sideline, junk catches around his calves and ankles, over the middle of the field. So every one that was a concern, he made it up with an acrobatic catch. And I don't know if you remember AJ Green, his first couple years in the NFL, he also had some kind of inconsistent hands and struggled at the catch point from time to time. So I think Mims has shown the ability to win at every level of the defense, quick game, intermediate, down the field, red zone, yak, that I think he could be a number one option. And I think it's an intriguing year that this is the style of player that's going to fall to round two, like a Michael Thomas, but could end up being one of the more productive receivers in the class.
No, it's a good point. It's going to be something certainly very interesting, because that there's going to be talented receivers that fall that 5, 6, 7 years from now, we're going to say, how did this guy fall to the second round? How did this guy fall to the third round? And we look back and he turned into one of the better receivers in the class. Let's get to the next question here. Juju Fay left a 5-star review. Another receiver question. You guys responded to the XYZ question about the receiver position a couple of weeks ago at the Combine. It got me thinking, where do you believe J.J. Arcega-Whiteside best belongs in the offense? I'm concerned. I was told he came from a similar offense at Stanford, but the production just isn't there. Where in his game, whether mental or physical, can he improve the most to make a leap in his sophomore year? Thanks, guys, for your hard work. So, number one, I guess from the mental side, we don't know how these guys are from a mental, us being the media, we don't know how these guys, if the guy is having issues picking up the offense or is not having issues picking up the offense. All we can say is what we see on game days. And that's what, and that's all that we all get to see. I think when you look at JJ Arcega-Whiteside, look, if this was a player that didn't show anything in the summer, I would say that there might be more of a cause for concern, but guys, I mean, you all saw the same. We talked about it on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast every single day last summer in training camp. We saw good stuff from JJ Arcega-Whiteside almost every day at training camp, and we saw good things in the preseason. I mean, that Ravens game was really, really good, a strong outing for him. There's plenty of reason to have faith that he can come back and have a strong sophomore year. Not to mention that the wide receiver position almost always takes a lot of time for guys. I mean, it used to be accepted that by year 2, year 3, that's when you can expect receivers to step in. And we see it all around the NFL all the time. It takes time for guys at that position in particular, because you were asked to do so much from a mental side that you maybe were not asked to do in college. It takes time for you to get accustomed to the NFL game.
Yeah, there's a learning curve for some and not for others. And a lot of times it's what offense you were in college, and is that system what you're running in the NFL? Do you have the same coach, which has happened from time to time? There was also some interesting circumstances with Arcega-Whiteside, having to play multiple receiver positions, changing on the fly throughout the week. Obviously, a lot of pressure and focus on that receiver position. Didn't have a whole lot of veteran presence on the field with him to kind of guide him through in those in-game situations, obviously with the injuries to Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson. But as far as his usage moving forward, it is an interesting conversation. I don't think he's that prototypical X receiver that you're going to put him outside the numbers and have him beat the number 1 corner. I would like him used more in that Trey Burton style of role, that number 3 in the offense, the big slot player, finding more matchups, because he's a big body receiver that can run, but he can win in every kind of area of the field. And I'm not sure if I want to call him a big slot, maybe an undersized tight end, maybe a well-rounded receiver, but he's a guy that I think could move around the offense that I'd like to see isolate with some more matchups, the way Trey Burton was used in 2016 in the Super Bowl campaign in 2017. And right now that third tight end position is kind of a revolving door right now. So I think there's some intriguing options he provides. We've seen his red zone ability at Stanford and his ability to win one-on-ones and high point the ball. So I think his skill set really gives the Eagles some flexibility and some creative usage options moving forward.
That's really interesting, because I projected him as an X, moving forward, because I figure he's a guy who can win those contested catches, that he can be someone relied upon to be Carson Wentz's security blanket on the outside. But, I think over the years, you tend to see guys who behind the scenes aren't going to make it because whether it's work ethic, inability to keep up. And to Fran's point, you saw promise in the summer in training camp and preseason. He seems to have a good head on his shoulders. I think he's got the right attitude. I think he's someone that maybe it just take a little longer to develop. And unfortunately, because of the situation the Eagles were in last season, they were hoping that learning curve would be accelerated. It wasn't. But I definitely think he's someone who can bounce back and have a strong future moving forward. I'm still very high on JJ and where he'll fit in this offense.
Yeah. And really quick, Fran and C-Mac, I just want to say, I think you also have to kind of steer things back to who JJ Arcega-Whiteside is. This is a guy that was an all-state basketball player in South Carolina. He finished 4th in the 100-meter finals in South Carolina. This is a freak show athlete. And once he loosens up and starts to play faster and more confident, once he understands the offense and starts to play a step faster, I'm telling you, he's really going to open some eyes. He is a freak athlete.
Yeah, and I still have faith that he can win on the outside as well. And I do think he offers that versatility, a guy that can come inside and be able to do those kind of things. What we've seen in the past from like a Jordan Matthews, I think he can do some of that. But I do think that, he's shown some ability to be able to win on the outside as well. So I'm excited about JJ moving into year 2 and seeing how he can develop and even get, give him some time, especially working with Aaron Moorhead now, the new receivers coach here in Philadelphia. Will be interesting to watch. Our last one here comes from A Bauer 91, left a 5-star review. Love this draft coverage. The analysis is great and really helps me as a fan get to know some of the draft prospects. I was wondering if you could talk about the players in my mock draft and the value at the spots they were taken. We'll kind of buzz through this one here. First round pick, Grant Delpit, the safety from LSU. second round pick, wide receiver Jalen Reagor from TCU, and then third round pick Troy Pride, the corner from Notre Dame. So addressing the secondary in two of the first three picks. Guys, what do you think of Grant Delpit, Jalen Reagor, Troy Pride? That's a pretty intriguing trio right there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Grant Delpit is kind of that Malcolm Jenkins ball skills type of safety that can do a lot of different things for you on defense. Play back, play in the box, cover slots and tight ends. Jalen Reagor, man, that's exactly what this offense could use. That gadgety player that can win in a variety of ways, whether it's just giving him the ball or down the field. A guy you can line up in the backfield too. I'd love to see a Jalen Reagor style of player in this offense. We saw what Debo did for the San Francisco 49ers last year. I think everybody's looking for that next Debo, and I think Jalen Reagor could be an intriguing option for offenses.
For me, Troy Pride, we very, very intriguing there. Very athletic. Seems to start to put it all together. Didn't have the best workout of the combine, even though he did run a pretty good time in the 40. But I think overall he was disappointed by his workout. But he was someone who really improved his stock at the Senior Bowl, was impressive in the one-on-ones there. And you saw that athleticism on the field. So someone who's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, it's certainly a very intriguing player that we're not really talking enough about because of some of the other talent at the cornerback spot. But Troy Pride had an excellent week down in Mobile. Day three, guys, here. Tyler Biadish, the center from Wisconsin, in the fourth round. Tyler Johnson, the wide receiver from Minnesota, a very talented player, very skilled wide receiver. Made some great catches throughout the course of his career with the Gophers. Khalil Davis, who stood out to us, CMAC, down at the East-West Shrine Bowl, had a strong combine performance as well. And then LaMichael Pirine, Ben, the running back you brought up earlier, rounding the draft out. Thoughts here on day three?
I think I need to go back and watch these Nebraska guys. I think there's two Davis brothers in the trenches there. They both tested pretty well at the combine. I need to finish up their tape. I don't remember if they were both at the East-West Shrine or only one of them.
They were.
Yeah, but guys, I need to go back and recheck. I think one of them ran really well at the combine. It's been on my rewatch list.
Khalil Davis ran very, very well, and both guys performed well down in Mobile. But down at St. Petersburg. But Khalil Davis was the one who really, really stood out with his performance at the Shrine Bowl.
Yeah, and then LaMichael Pirine, I love, like we were saying before, his upside in the pass game. Obviously, we've given Corey Clement the opportunity to seek employment elsewhere, and Jordan Howard unfortunately signed down there in Miami. So and Darren Sproles retired. So there's a little bit of a void there in the backfield with Miles Sanders. So I'd like to see other guys with that's the way Wendell Smallwood was viewed out of West Virginia and the way his upside in the pass game. So a similar type of player, and that's what day three is all about, adding depth to those positional groups.
All right. Well, this was really, really good stuff, guys, and really great questions from everybody out there. Thanks so much for sending them. Again, that's the best way to support the show. Go on to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating. Leave us a comment. If you leave a question, we'll hit on it here on the show. Guys, appreciate the time here. We'll get together again, I guess, next week. Do the same thing right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.